Okay, let me just be double sure once again. That was just a mistake. Okay, all right then. Like I said, I'm glad to be here once again. And then happy new month to every one of us. Thank God that we can see the beginning of another quarter. So, and then I'll just run us through the agenda. Like Solomon said, we'll be doing this together. Um, Solomon will be doing more of the demo part. So we just have like for this session, I know last week, for the past 2 weeks, we looked at M365 identity models, where we look at the different types of identity models, cloud-only identity and hybrid identity. And then we went over to also introduce an Active Directory environment where we were able to show how you can change domain surface, and then also some PowerShell scripting where a little bit of PowerShell scripting was done that day also last week. But today we'll just continue from there. I think what's the agenda for today entails is we just have a background introduction of what hybrid identity and directory synchronization is. And then we'll talk about the types of authentication in the hybrid identity model. Then we'll look at introduction to Azure AD Connect, the prerequisites you have to have for AD Connect, and how you can configure it, testing and troubleshooting, and then the hybrid identity management as a whole. Then we'll go into demo. And that demo will be handled mostly by Solomon. So the demo yes, we'll have some this week, and then definitely, our interactive session is always the upper week. We will also look at it. So moving on, let's have a little bit of background on this topic. Now, hybrid identity and directory synchronization are actually two very important concepts when it comes to managing your Microsoft 365 environments and environments that use both cloud and on-premise resources. I think by now we all know the different kinds of cloud deployment model we can have, whereas you have users or you have resources purely in the cloud, or you have resources on-premise, and probably you want to also have some resources in the cloud. So I'm sure by now every one of us know that. So when we talk about hybrid, hybrid takes this, the hybrid identity also takes the same concept from the word hybrid cloud. So to say, when you have an hybrid cloud, it means that deployment mode, it means that you have resources on premise and you have in the cloud. So in that way, if you want to allow your users the seamless ability for them to be able to use same credentials both on premise and all of that, so in that way you talk about hybrid identity. So hybrid identity refers to a scenario where an organization users have identities both in on-premise Active Directory and then on the Azure AD. And I'm sure a lot of us remember how we went through the Azure AD last week. Active Directory last week. So the aim is to allow them to access both on-premise and cloud resources using the same set of credentials. That's actually what it is. So hybrid identity is often used in scenario where you have organizations want to gradually migrate their resources to the cloud or want to maintain some resources on-premise. I'm sure every one of us, we are still good with that kind of explanation. So let's talk about the directory synchronization, which is also a process of synchronizing on-premise user accounts and attributes in Azure AD. So today, like I said, you have an identity on-premise and you have also in the cloud, but you want a way where you can match these two identities that at the end of the day, either your users can use the same identity both on-premise and in the cloud, and that process is actually what is referred to as directory synchronization. So the whole aim is to allow users to access cloud resources using their existing on-premise credentials. And a tool that Microsoft offers to do that is actually what the Azure AD Connect, which we will look in a bit. It is actually to help to automate this process and keep both directories in sync. When I talk about both directories here, I'm referring to the one on-premise in your Active Directory and also the identity that you have created in the cloud. So one of the things you want to bear in mind is that so you're looking at things like multi-factor authentication and then also your data residency. So those are very important things when you're creating an hybrid identity. So Microsoft actually provides a form of guidance and best practices for organization to implement this technology in a secure and a compliant manner. And they have a lot of these resources actually in the Microsoft Learn document. But then today, let's focus on what we're trying to do, which is hybrid identity. So today, businesses and corporations are becoming more and more a mixture of what we see today, like on-premise and cloud applications. That's what they have today. So users require access to those applications both on-premise and in the cloud. So the challenge really is managing the users both on-premise and the cloud. So that's the challenge, but this challenge is actually what the Microsoft Identity solution is trying to solve. So when you talk about hybrid identity, you're talking about users account that originates, like I said, in on-premise Active Directory, and then they still have a copy in their Azure AD. So most times what you have in this case is that on-premise Active Directory domain services is the authoritative source of account information, because what you have is that your information is already on your on-premise AD. You are only just syncing it over to the cloud. So and because of this, you find that any changes that you do to any of these accounts is always one way. So changes can only occur from your on-premise Active Directory domain user accounts to Azure AD, not the other way around. So you find that these are identities in this scenario are actually referred to as synchronized identity, which means you synchronize them from on-premise into the cloud. And in such cases, when you want to make any form of changes to the account information, you can't make it on Azure AD or just like you do for cloud only, but then you have to make it from on-premise, and that is why the flow of change is only in one way. So and then most, I think I've already said a lot of these administration tasks mostly are performed on on-premise, and this is what really looks like. So you see that this is majorly the component of hybrid identity. This is your on-premise. Come on, let me just get my pointer. 1 minute, please. So this is your on-premise environment, and then this is your Microsoft 365 environment. Definitely, you know that the identity provider, which we have gone through last week or for the past 2 weeks right now, the identity provider for each of these different environments differs. And then we know for M365, the identity provider is what is Azure AD. Why for your on-premise always what? Your Active Directory domain services. And this is where your accounts are created. So the component that makes us an hybrid identity will be your Active Directory domain services and also the tool, so to say, that is used to sync those identities, which is your on-premise user, to Azure AD. So these are the components that make up your hybrid identity. Sorry, please, can somebody help me mute? I think there's some, I'm getting some sound somewhere. All right, thank you. So let's talk about authentication for hybrid identity. So we already have established an understanding of hybrid identity is an identity model in Microsoft 365. The alternative, if you're not doing hybrid identity, is for you to do what cloud only. So, but then when it comes to hybrid identity, there are certain things we need to bear in mind, and those are the authentication when it comes to hybrid identity. So hybrid identity is further divided into two. which is managed authentication. That is, authentication in hybrid identity today is divided into two. One, the managed authentication, and then the federated authentication. So Azure AD handles this authentication process by using what is referred to in a managed authentication, in a managed authentication, Azure AD handles the authentication process by using what is referred to as a locally stored hash version of your password or the user password. And then it sends this credential to an on-premise software agent to be authenticated by the on-premise Active Directory. So you can see that with managed authentication, it's further divided into two. You have password authentic synchronization, where Azure AD is the one performing the authentication itself. And then you have pass-through authentication, where Azure AD is actually what passing that authentication process or that validation to your on-premise Active Directory domain services. So sometimes it's actually very important because these are sometimes questions that you get from exams or even from interview. And then you ask people what are the different types of authentication for hybrid identity, and then you see people just telling me cloud identity and all of that. But there are, so prepare your mind down. There are certain questions in interview that they are asking you because they want you to be sure of it. And then again, you have scenario in exams where where the question that will be thrown to you would be when it comes to password hash synchronization, who is the authentication provider, who is actually doing the authentication? And then you hear people, because they hear password as synchronization, that because it is synced from on-premise, you hear people tell me that it is Active Directory AD. So meanwhile, you have to know the difference between the flow of authentication between these two is actually very important. Is an exam question also, so pay attention to especially this type of authentication. Then so like I said, but federated authentication is actually a process where Azure AD redirects the client's computer requesting authentication to another identity provider. So you have what is called a proxy kind of authentication taking place here. So I am not, so instead of Active Directory domain services on-premise to be the one directly authenticated, I use the word directly because it's still doing the authentication. But what it does is that those authentication process is proxy to another server or to another identity provider before it gets. So most times that's why you have Active Directory federation services in between what your on-premise server and then the Azure AD to carry out that authentication process. So those are the things you need to bear in mind, especially when it comes to the different types of hybrid identity that you have. So let's talk about Azure Active Directory seamless single sign-on. So with all of these authentication, there is this seamless single sign-on that has come in. These authentication methods actually provide a single sign-on capability. And then what single sign-on is actually is the ability for a user to automatically sign in to any of the services on their corporate devices, as long as they're connected to a corporate network. So I give an example. I come into my office, I sign into my system. So typically I don't get another prompt to sign into my Office or my M365 application that is on my devices, because single sign-on is working at that time because I have enabled it. So what you find that is that Azure Active Directory single sign-on, when enabled, users don't need to type in their password to sign into Azure AD. So you find that you can open your browser and type in portal.office.com. With single sign-on is enabled, and you have a sort of hybrid identity in place in whatever way, using either of the methods we've talked about, I've shown you before, whether the pass-through authentication or the password authentication, whichever one you have used, and you sign in into your system, what you will notice is that at the end of the day, you do not get prompted to say, oh, you want to open portal.azure.com or portal.office.com. It seamlessly sign you in. So every services you are trying to access on, as long as you're in your corporate network, you will find out that you can actually go into it easily, seamlessly. And then the feature provides your user easy access to cloud-based application without needing any additional on-premise components. And I think I have also said that a lot. So let's look at now the different types of managed authentication when it comes to hybrid identity. Remember, we said that there are two different kinds of authentication when it comes to hybrid identity, and those two types are what managed authentication and federated authentication. Now, the first type of managed authentication is actually the password hash synchronization. So what happens here is that when password has changed or reset on premise, a new password hash are synchronized to Azure AD so that your user that changed that password can actually use the same password for their cloud resources and on-premise. So what happened is that, and then if you are having a conversation, because you will get to that stage where you are having a conversation with not only people in your organization, or probably maybe you're having a conversation with a customer, and you are trying to tell them what authentication method they're supposed to adopt, because a customer can meet you and say a scenario and tell you, yes, we are skeptical about going to the cloud. One of the reasons is we do not want our users to be able to remember two credentials while they are on-premise and in the cloud. So it is your job as an M365 administrator or as an IT administrator or in M365 to be able to educate that customer, or to be able to educate your boss in the right approach. So you are placing it before them. One of the level of comfort you want to give them is the fact that when password has changed, they are actually, when password is synchronized to Azure AD, they are actually never sent to Azure AD in plain text. So in clear text, what you only have is what is referred to is the hash. In fact, Microsoft claims that is the hash of that password that is actually sent over. So with password hash synchronization, you synchronize your on-premise AD user account with Microsoft 365, and you are also able to manage your users on premise. So that is it. Management for your users in this sense, you can only be able to do it on premise. You can't do it in the cloud. Then hashes of the user password are what is synchronized to Azure, are synchronized from your Active Directory domain services to Azure AD. So your users, the benefit here is that your users can use the same password on premise and in the cloud. So, and then this is actually considered the simplest way to enable authentication for Active Directory domains identities in Azure AD. Now, let's look at how this works. I hope my screen is large enough for you to see, because I tried as much as possible. Now, one of the things you need to understand is that the Active Directory domain services today, which is a role on Windows Server that Solomon last week showed us how we can enable, and then we can have what is called a domain controller server, a domain controller on the network. So it is when you, another thing, let me digress a bit. It is when you enable a role on a server operating system, is that role that defines at the end of the day what that server is going to do. So Solomon last week enabled the Active Directory domain services role. So the server automatically became what? A domain controller. So it became a domain controller and an identity provider, identity server, and access manager server on the network. So what happens is this: that Active Directory domain services store password in the form of a hash value. So the hash value is a result of a one-way. I don't want to get to one-way mathematical function. So we call it like the hashing algorithm. And why it is one way is because there is no method for you to revert the results of the one-way function to a plain text version of another password. So it is actually one way. That's why it is, and it is mostly for security purpose, so that even when it is intercepted, yes, we know password can be intercepted, we know all of that, but even when it is intercepted, you cannot have it revert more than one way back. So what happens is that every 2 minutes, let's assume every 2 minutes, the password adds synchronization agent on your AD Connect. So Solomon is going to show us AD Connect in a bit. So when you remember what I said, your AD Connect server is what is the tool that helps you to do what? Synchronize your user identity on-premise to the cloud so that they can use what the same username and password. So what happens is that when it is installed, there is what is called the password as synchronization agent that comes with your AD Connect. So that agent, what that agent does is that it requests any stored password hashes from your domain controller. Now, when it gets that password hash, what it does is that before sending it, the domain controller encrypts it. So it encrypts it with another form of protocol, which is the MD4. So you have the MD4 password hash algorithm that it used to do what? Encrypt it. This use like a key algorithm, so to say, key encryption protocol to encrypt that password. And when it is encrypted, it then sends the result of the password hash synchronization to the agent. So it sends it over to this agent. You can see where it starts from, and then it sends it to the agent on the AD Connect. And when it receives it from the AD Connect, this password hash again on AD Connect is further what? Encrypted. So there is this encryption or identity-based encryption protocol it used that is called SALT. I don't mean the one we use in cooking soup. So, but it is called SALT. It's an identity-based um protocol. So it generates what that does is that the sort now generates a key to decrypt it and then do what? Send it over. So the password synchronization is sent over. And then when a user is authenticating to your Azure AD, I come to my system now and I want to authenticate to my AD. I sign in. What happens is this. Once the user signs in, the hash of my password is actually compared with what is stored on Azure AD. And then when it sees that the hash of the password that I'm supplying to Azure AD is what it got from all of this process down here, then it allows me in. So that's the way it works. So sometimes I have seen myself in an interview session, and I just asked, when somebody tells me, oh, he's an expert, and then he gives me a lot of, oh, I'm very good and all of that, just explain to me the simple process of password hash synchronization, how it works. And then you find that that's okay, what we call in Yoruba in those days, wello, you just see the wello go in the silence and all of that. So the reason why I'm doing this is also, I don't know where you find yourself in any form of interview session, and then you can have the opportunity. And let me be honest with you, when you have an opportunity to talk in this way, it actually gives you an edge even in an interview session. So remember what we're trying to do here. Our goal is not because we just want to have sessions every Saturday. We want a place where we have very sound engineers that are very job ready, that when they stand between even the process of them to get their work, they are well knowledgeable in what they are saying. So that's why we take our time most times to break this down for you. So I believe with that, I hope that my explanation is helpful. All right, so moving on, let's talk about how pass-through authentication works. Okay, I think so. Pass-through authentication today. So pass-through authentications allow users to sign into both on-premise and Microsoft 365 resources and an application using their on-premise account and password. So the difference between password hash is that the hash of the password is what is synchronized. So the authentication provider still remains what? Azure AD. That's the difference. But when it comes to pass-through authentication, the authentication provider is actually what? Your on-premise. How does it work? So what it does is that the configuration is set up in a way that it validates the user password directly against on-premise Active Directory. So there is no storing of your password hash in Azure AD. For password hash authentication, it stores a hash of your password. While for pass-through, it doesn't store it. So it's coming directly to what? To your on-premise. You can see here that a user sits here and he wants to enter. And when he goes in, he enters his credential, immediately he does, okay, yes, there's a copy of your account here that has been synchronized. Yes, it's a synchronized identity. We are sure of that. We agree. But what it does is that the credentials it is now supplying, there is an agent that your Azure AD Connect use in communicating. And then that agent communicates with, it sits also on what? On your Active Directory domain services. That agent is installed, and then it comes to do validation to say this user's account, is it really, I mean, this user's password, is it who really is? So most organizations that feel that, oh, even though it is the hash of my password that they said that Microsoft is getting, for security purpose, I still do not feel comfortable that my password actually sync over to Azure AD, then this is a solution for them. So why Microsoft brought this is also to give people a level of confidence that even if you're not comfortable to say the hash of your password is stored with us, you can have the pass-through authentication, and then you can directly authenticate against your Active Directory domain services. So let's see how that works also. Now, how that works is that you find out that a user tries to access an application here. And when that user tries to access an application, is actually redirected to Azure AD for signing. And when Azure AD receives, Azure AD comes back with the user password and then verifies to say, okay, that user, yes, it is actually the one. And then the user name and password is encrypted here, it stays in the queue. So you find that this is your on-premise environment, which is your Windows Server environment. There is an agent here that is sitting on your pass-through authentication server, which is actually your AD Connect. But there is an agent here, and there is an agent also on your domain controller. So what it does is that agent picks that request, it decrypts the password using his own private key, and then validate that password against your on-premise Active Directory, which also takes that result back and take it to Azure AD. So that's when the user at the end of the day gets authenticated, and then you see a complete signing process here. So that's the way pass-through authentication works. So what happens is like it hands over the authentication process to on-premise. So when you have in an exam environment and then you hear who is the authentication provider, who is the source, who is the authenticator or authentication authority, let me use the right word. When you hear who is the authentication authority for a pass-through authentication, then you know it is on-premise Active Directory. But for password hash synchronization, it is what's Azure AD. And then let's go on to the last one, which is the federated authentication. So federated authentication is primarily for large enterprise organization, which have very complex authentication requirements. So some organizations will tell you they are still not comfortable. We want to be the one to host everything ourselves. You get. So with federated authentication, users have the same password and on-premise and in the cloud. And the beauty of it is that they have the single sign-on. So Microsoft leverage on this single sign-on technology from Federated Education and infuse it also into what? Into the password hash synchronization and then the pass-through authentication today. That's what you have there. Now, common scenario and consideration when you are selecting between these three types of authentication. I hope you can see my screen. Oh, good. I think it came out bright. So I was actually bothered when I took the snapshot online. So this is your password hash synchronization and single sign-on. And then this is pass-through authentication and single sign-on. And then this is your Active Directory Federation services. Now, one of the things you need to say is that when you are planning the authentication process with your client or even for your environment, so these are the questions you want to ask yourself. If the fellow is looking at syncing new user, contacts a group created in their on-premise Active Directory to the cloud automatically, any of this can do. If the person is looking at setting up a tenant for M365 hybrid scenario, any of these also can do. Then if the person is looking at enabling users to sign in and access cloud services using their on-premise password, any of it too can do. If the person wants to implement single sign-on, you can see that the three of them can play in that also. So sometimes you can even use these to when you are in a place or you're having a conversation with a customer, you can use this to as like you are using it to do information gathering. And then you want to imagine how somebody will look at you and say, oh, that guy knows his onions, he knows what he's trying to say. So you're asking question, oh, are you trying to implement, do you plan to implement a single sign-on for all the corporate for a single sign-on using corporate credentials across your network? And the person say yes. You know, the question you put across to them helps you to know, yes, you're using that to know what you will give them at the end of the day, but also it positions you to be someone that is knowledgeable about what you're talking about. So, but when the person says he does not want password hashes are stored in the cloud, no, I'm not comfortable. I'm not comfortable with my password being stored, whether it is hash or whatever you call it. Yes, my regulatory compliance requirement forbids it. Then you know you are only giving them what? Pass-through authentication or ADFS. Now, if the person talks about multi-factor authentication solution, all of them. But if the person says, I don't even want the solution to be hosted in any cloud, but I want to enable on-premise multi-factor authentication solution. So I give an example. Let's say your environment, your company has, or you have a customer environment that are using other third-party multi-factor authentication solution, or even let it be Microsoft multi-factor authentication, which used to be Microsoft Identity, what's the second name? Microsoft Identity Management Server, I think, if I'm still right. So if you have people that has Entrust or Duo, that are installed on premise, but they feel that authentication server they have on premise, they want to have it that it can provide a multi-factor, they want to integrate it, you can actually do what? Recommend Active Directory domain services. And if they said, like, this is what I'm saying, smart card authentication like Entrust, like Duo, what other ones do we have? Is it Citric? Or yes, you can do it. So what you should bear at the back of your mind is that for any customer that you are giving this ADFS to, you have to bear it at the back of your mind that there are other requirements. Now, it is actually very, 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 very expensive. Very expensive in the sense that you require nothing less than a minimum of 4 servers to set up this, and to set it up only in a highly available mode within a site. If you are looking to set it up in more than one data center, so that if anything happens to a data center, you move it, then you will be looking for close to 6 or 8 servers. So it's actually very expensive, and this is the reason why they said it is only for large environment. The alternative is for you to see how you can leverage on Azure, to see how you can put this on Azure, and then you can have as much of VMs if you do not want to have physical server, and then be able to set it up. So that's some of the things. And again, you also need to know that for you to have an ADFS, you will require what is called a public key infrastructure, a PKI, which means you have to be able to generate certificates and all of that. So I just want to throw that in. That is that is not our focus today. So let's go on to Azure AD Connect. Now, if you're evaluating how to best meet your goals, one of the things you consider in a cloud managed solution will be the Azure AD Cloud. It will be Azure AD Connect. So another option is that if you want, so there is AD Connect today, but released into the market today is the cloud manage option, which I'll come up to in a bit, which is the Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync. But we'll just talk on that a bit. So Azure AD Connect is an on-premise Microsoft application that is designed to meet and accomplish your hybrid identity. So like I said, Azure AD Connect is the new one, is the new offering from Microsoft, and what it's designed to do is to also accomplish your hybrid identity goal for synchronization of your users, your groups, your contacts to Azure AD. And the way it does this is by provisioning an agent instead of what Azure AD Connect. So Azure AD Connect today, you install it as a server, it's as its agent. But this one, all you need to do is that you just have a cloud provisioning agent that is synced to your on-premise and then AD, and then you can actually work with it. Meanwhile, you can actually have this cloud sync. So I'm digressing a bit. This cloud sync is now the new one that is introduced apart from Azure AD, but doesn't mean that it can, even if you do, it can still work with Azure AD Connect. So recommendation from Microsoft today will tell you that there are still limitations with AD Connect Cloud Sync. Ensure that you still continue to use it with Azure AD Connect. So this is purely cloud, while this one is an on-premise solution. All right, so let's talk about the features of AD Connect. So first thing will be password synchronization, which I've been talking about for a long time now. Yeah, then I'm sure you know already. The pass-through authentication, which is also allows you to use the same password on-premise and in the cloud, but does not require additional infrastructure of a federated environment. The federation integration, which is an optional part of AD Connect and can be used to configure hybrid environment using on-premise ADFS infrastructure. And then your other features is the synchronization, which is responsible for creating users group and other objects. And then the health monitoring is also another feature of AD Connect. This means Azure AD Connect Health can provide robust monitoring and provide a central location in the Azure portal to view this activity. So if any of you have installed Azure AD Connect today, you should be getting things where maybe it can tell you, oh, synchronization circle for your for Azure AD to your server. Maybe for some of us that shut down, you'll be seeing that kind of error and all of that. And then if your your Azure AD Connect also is not LD enough, you will see it giving errors. So, or informing you. So before because I just don't want Solomon to jump into the demo before. I just want to lay a quick background on all of these. That what are the prerequisites you need to have if you want to install an AD Connect? So these are the things you need to bear in mind. So prerequisite you're supposed to have to install an AD Connect, especially when it comes to Azure AD environment. Remember, your Azure AD Connect sits on premise. You can also install it in a VM on Azure, but it will be infrastructure as a service. You know the difference between all the cloud service model. That's I'm sure Solomon did justice to that also when we started the class. So you know what your infrastructure as a service is. So if you have the option of installing it on premise or you install it as a VM in Azure. But then wherever you install it, the The important thing is that the prerequisite that you must meet on Azure AD. So these prerequisites are sometimes interview questions for me, for anybody coming for an interview. One of the prerequisites was that you must at least have an Azure AD tenant. So you know why you get that one. Every one of you today, you have Azure AD tenant, even with your M365 developer accounts. It's the tenant, you still have it. And then you can actually use any of these to manage your Azure AD Connect. Then you need to do what? Add and verify the domain you plan to use in Azure AD. So today, Solomon will be showing us how to add a custom domain to our tenants. Remember, the on Microsoft is what you came for. So I normally encourage people, please, what my encouragement to you will be is this: you can actually buy it may be difficult now that the what they call it, the money, but you can still buy from Nigeria. I know from Ultra Crest you can still buy it. So what I would advise is this: you can buy your own custom domain. You can buy one and then use it in your lab. You can buy one even against your name or even anything, maybe just buy it. It's not going to be more than a 3,000 in a year or 3,500 for a year, or it might not even be up to that. But buy it so that you can use it to practice in your lab. It's actually very important. I can tell you that if you install AD Connect and you install AD together, you can practice how you do what you synchronize with a custom domain name. So what you need to do is that you must be sure that you add and verify the domain, the custom domain you plan to use in Azure AD. So for example, if you plan to use contosol.com for your user, make sure that this domain has been verified, and you are not using only the contosol.onmicrosoft.com as your default domain, which is very important. So again, the Azure AD tenant allows by default. These are some of the things you want to bear at the back of your mind. Maybe if you have a customer that says, I have more than, by default 50,000 objects. So they can use Azure AD, but when you verify the domain, the limit increases to what? 300,000. So if you have a customer that says, oh, I have 100,000 objects, you can tell them that by default, your Azure AD tenant allows it. But once you verify a custom domain, this limit increases to about 300,000 objects. So you have to have that. And then if you need more objects in Azure AD, maybe they are telling you that there are 500,000 user objects or objects they want to synchronize to Azure AD. You only need to open what? A support case. And then, like I said, if you need more than 500,000 objects, you need a license, such as your Azure AD Premier or the EMS, the Enterprise Mobility Plus Security. And again, you also need to open a support case with Microsoft. Now, that is for Azure AD. But what are the prerequisites you need to prepare? You need to prepare for your on-premise data. This is on-premise data. Those are the prerequisites for Azure AD. For your on-premise data, you can use what? So do you remember me saying that AD modify? Now, this is actually the tool. I tried as much as possible 2 weeks ago to try to remember this name, and the thing just completely left my head, so I couldn't. But when I saw it again, I said, yes, this is what I was trying to look for. So you can actually use the identity fix, ID fix, we call it, to identify errors such as duplicates or formatting problem your directory before you synchronize to Azure AD. But then, maybe because I'm so used to using PowerShell now, and that's one of the things that will encourage you, you can use this, or you can use PowerShell to correct all of those errors. So that is what you need to do on-premise. Again, what you need to do is that review optional sync features you can enable in Azure AD and evaluate them, and evaluate which features you should enable. So there's a lot of features you can use in Azure AD Connect. Review them before you enable them on-premise. You know, even if you have an on-premise exchange and you want to do hybrid, you want to set up hybrid, you also on AD Connect enable exchange hybrid. Solomon will show you all of that in a bit. Then on-premise Active Directory. On your on-premise Active Directory, yes, we know that we did not do so much on Active Directory domain services. That's why I was asking if anybody needs Active Directory 101. But if you, because there is something that is called schema version, there is something that is called forest functional level and domain functional level. Yes, so but for the Active Directory schema version, the Active Directory schema version automatically it's a number. As at 2020, as at 2008, it was 46. As at 2012, I think it's 56 or something like that. So for every operating system that Microsoft ships out, it has what is called a schema version. That schema version is the number that represents that operating system. So once you install an operating system on a server and then you promote that machine to a domain controller, it automatically takes the schema version that comes with the operating system. So maybe as I'm talking, you guys can check up later and say schema versions for Windows Server. So you will actually see the numbers, if I'm still right, 48, 50, but for Windows Server 2016, I want to believe is around, if it's not 70 something or 60 something, I mean, I can't cram it. So that's the truth about it. So Active Directory schema version and forest functional level must be Windows Server 2013. So forest functional level talks about the highest level that your forest will be. So you have forest functional level, which only speaks to the schema and then your domain naming. So you know in Active Directory, there are two functional levels. You have forest functional level and you have the domain functional level. Your forest functional level, the components that are under it, if you know anything about fixed more rules, flexible single master operation rules, you have the schema master and the domain naming master, and they can only be one of them in the forest at a time. You can't have more than. Then for the domain functional level, you have things like your PID, that is your PDC, your primary domain controller, your infrastructure master rules, and then the RID. So they all have different functions. So, but the forest functional level determines the Windows Server operating system which can be used. Now, it must not be anything lower than 2003. Even right now, we will not even recommend you to have a forest functional level of 2003. I will tell you that my preferred mode will be what? A 2012. Now, what this forest functional level is responsible for is that it is responsible for the kind of what the highest number of operating system your domain controllers can run in your forest. So if I set a forest functional level to Windows Server 2003, it means that I can still introduce the domain controller of a Windows Server 2003 to that forest, but I cannot introduce a Windows Server 2000. I'm sure some of you will not even know there are Windows 2000, especially some of you that are new into this. So you will even know NT. So you will not even know NT version 4.0 of, you know, so don't bother your head on it. So normally I will tell you that the functional level determines one, the security, the more security features you have on that forest. Remember what your forest stands for. Your forest is actually what your security boundary in an Active Directory environment. So it talks about what security you can have in that forest. And again, it also talks about what level of operating system your domain controllers can run on. So that is one of the things. The domain controllers can run any version as long as the schema and forest level requirement is met. It must not be lower than what Windows Server 2003. Now, the domain controller also must be writable. I don't know if any of you know what is read-only domain controller. So read-only domain controller, you can't make changes to it. Where is it applicable? It is applicable when you have environments where people, let me say I have a branch office and I do not want the administrator in that branch office to be making changes. So I give them a read only. So for read only, they only read updates from the head office where the writable domain controller is. So this is actually to prevent any error from happening. And then you can, and the only reason why you have a read only domain controller in a branch office is that instead of the users coming over the over the connectivity, whether it's VPN connection, to come and authenticate in your head office, they can actually authenticate locally because there is a copy of their directory information on the read only. So I'm digressing a bit because I know some of you may not know about it, but then if you know, apologies that I'm making you feel that read-only domain controller. So I just hope it will be helpful for some people. So again, using on-premise forests or domains by using dotted. So you cannot have NetBIOS name that is, you remember last week that our NetBIOS name was what's the name of that cloud again? What did you call it, Solomon? Something cloud.
Cloud.
Yes, yes. So imagine that you have a dot. Yes, you have a dot at the back of that cloud. It is not allowed. It is not supported. So you cannot have a period at the back of that NetBIOS name. Then Microsoft also recommends that you enable the Active Directory recycle bin. It just recommends, it's not that it is completely going, in case anything happens, you can actually restore from your Active Directory recycle bin. Okay, so when you're looking at Active Directory Connect, Azure AD Connect server installation prerequisites, AD Connect must be installed on a domain join system. It is important. So you can have it collocated together on your domain controller. It is actually okay to have it. Or you can have it on a separate server, but that server must be domain joined. And then the operating system must be from Windows Server 2016 upward. Now, what you need to bear at the back of your mind is that if you have organizations that says that, oh, I'm not comfortable having my domain controller be internet facing or exposed. So you have two options for them, because if you put AD Connect on the same server as your domain controller, you have to allow some traffic. So you can either be more granular in allowing the traffic, specifying the traffic that server can go to, maybe your on-premise to the to the Azure AD that it will be synchronizing to. You want to be more specific on that, or you want to put it on another, just a domain join. So even when I say that you can put it, you can collocate it on the same server as your AD, bear in mind that I would rather prefer that even if you do so, define the traffic, destination and targets, define the ports so that your Active Directory is, your domain controller is not unnecessarily exposed on the internet. So that is one tip. I hope is useful for someone. And then the minimum .NET framework version required is 4.6. You have to have that. Azure AD Connect cannot be installed on small business server. I doubt there are some people that may not know this, but small business server, that was one of the servers I started with in the days of, so you even have it as small business servers 2000. Small business servers are servers that you have it then. You have AD active, you have the AD Exchange, SharePoint, file server, everything installed on one single server. So it's a form of server, or it's a form of server OS that Microsoft did like that. So it's not only doing one function, one rule. So instead of having different servers for AD, Exchange, SharePoint, and all of that, you have just one server that can have all of those solutions installed together. But it has a lot of limitation. It's mostly for small environment. So you can't install AD Connect for it. Some people, I've seen a customer recently that says they want to migrate from small business server to Office 365. I'm actually surprised that there are still customers that are running it. Then it cannot also be installed on Windows Server Essential that is before 2019. So the server must be running what a Windows Server standard or higher. Then Azure AD Connect must have a full GUI. You cannot install it on what's the name? Windows Server Core. It has to be a full GUI. So that's the only, so it's not supported on Windows Server Core. Then if you have hybrid identity administrator, if you have the hybrid identity administrators that are using MFA, or if your account that you're using to install it has this, then you need to also do what? Ensure that you have this URL put in the trusted site list. So because you'll be prompted to do so. Now, finally, in terms of accounts, you have to have Azure AD Global Administrator account or Hybrid Identity Administrator account for you to be able to run Azure AD. And then if you are using Express settings or you want to upgrade from Directory Sync, you must have what? An Enterprise Administrator account. So, and then if you're using custom setting installation, you must, installation parts, you have more options. So these are the things you need to bear in mind before you install AD Connect. I hope my talk has been quite very useful because I know I talk a lot, but I hope it has been very useful. So I'm going to hand over now to Solomon, who is going to take you through the demo. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that awesome session, right? I think I was supposed to take this session, but I would have skipped some stuff personally because I was also considering that. So I already created the slide. And yeah, I'm happy that when you look at the password hash, then the pass-through authentication and the federation, right? The process, what is actually happening at the back end, most people don't take their time to explain that, right? So I think it's something you should just understand in terms of how do the passwords sync from on-prem to cloud. But even if you don't have to cram all of that, very soon you will get comfortable with it, but just also try to note exactly where the authentications take place. So in case you have an interview, they're asking you a question, once we are using password hash, where does the authentication take place? You should know, okay, this is taking place in Active Directory, this is taking place on-prem, this is taking place on-prem. So that was a very great session. So I would continue from there. So what I want to do now is how we can actually use the Azure AD Connect, right? That's Azure AD Connect is an engine on its own that I will still have to explain some stuff to you. But before we do that, it is always good we have a custom domain on our tenants where we will be syncing our Active Directory to. So I will show you how we would connect to a domain to Office 365. Then I will still do the demo for the Azure AD Connect. So looking at time, right, I think I may just ask if maybe we should do the setup for the Azure AD Connect next Saturday and then do the domain joining, because I don't know how long the domain will take, because I just want to explain DNS and then I'll just tell you what we are doing for each of the records. I don't just want to copy paste, and then what's this guy doing? So talking about DNS, right? What is DNS, right? DNS is domain name system, right? And if I want to explain DNS to you, the best way I always explain DNS to someone is if you ask me right now that you're coming to visit me and I tell you, yes, I will send you my address now. And you say, okay, what is your address? If I tell you my address is latitude 170 minus 1.6.0. That's actually the location I'm in, but to you it doesn't make sense. You're going to be asking yourself, what exactly is this guy saying? I'm actually giving you the exact location where I am, and if you carry that location and probably put it in Google Map will show you exactly where I am. But it will be easier if I tell you, this is my address. I'm staying at number 7 Banana Island. You can easily remember number 7 Banana Island than those numbers, right? So what DNS does for us in the internet, it translates all this alphanumeric name that we know, like www.microsoft.com and all of that. It translates that to, no, I don't have a slide now, sorry. Let me just turn on my camera. So I don't have a slide for that. So I want to join the tenant, to join a domain to the tenant, but I just want you to know what DNS is all about. So what DNS does for us is, when you go to any website and you type www.microsoft.com, it is translating it to an IP address, because everything on the internet, what you recognize, everything on the internet is the IP. Your computer, your phone that you're using to join this meeting, they all have IP. And that's what the internet would use to recognize your computer. That's what the internet will use to recognize your phone. It doesn't know your phone by the name of your phone. It is that those IPs that each of those computers have. And now what is actually helping to translate the name to the IP address, it is the work of the DNS. That's what the DNS does. It translates alphanumeric domain names that we know, it translates them to IPs. So if we still want to just probably just throw more light how the internet works, right? When you go and type your domain name on a browser, what simply happens, right? We have a DNS server. What that DNS server does, it sends the www.microsoft.com to a root server. So the root server will probably search and say, okay, we have .com. That .com can be .org, which is like the top level domain. It will now send it to the server that handles that, which is the domain server, right? And what that domain server does, right? If it looks at it, it will say, okay, this is a .com. I will send it to the name server. The name server is the authoritative server. It holds the IPs and different information about the domain that we are sending, right? So once the authoritative server goes through it, it can now match the domain name to an IP and then send it back to the DNS server, which in turn would display the website you're trying to view. So, but now what you can as well do, we can also store informations, right, in our domain, right? So those the domain that we have, those records we store in our domain is what we call DNS record. So what we'll be working with now is the DNS record. I'm sorry, I don't really have a slide for this, and I don't think I can explain most of the DNS record, but I'll try to explain each of those DNS records as I am going through them in M365. So let me share my screen now. So I will pull up so this is my screen. So once you can see my screen, just let me know. So, okay, so I'm logged in now to my M365 admin center, right? This is the M365 admin center. So let me just refresh this. Now that I'm refreshing this, right, I would just click on show all. And once I click on show all, we have settings. So if you look at settings here, we have domains. So I'll click on domains. So when I come to domain, you will see that this is the default domain you get when you register your M365. You always have the name of the domain you chose when you were setting it up, .onmicrosoft.com. So that's the name you would use when you're creating your users, the UPN name they'll use. So, but we want to add our own custom domain to M365. So what we are going to do, we'll click on add domain. And when we click on add domain, before we add this domain, we should have paid for this domain from the domain registrar. So we should have gone to search for this domain and say, oh, I want to buy this domain. And by the time we see that the domain is available, then we can pay for it. So if I go to Namecheap, someone said namecheap.com, right? This is not where the domain I want to add is. I can come here, create an account. When I create an account, then I can say I want to use m365group.com, right? If I click search, now it will tell me if the domain is available. You can see this is already registered since 2001, but I have other options here. So you can choose to get .co, .info, depending on which you prefer. So for me, I always tell people, so you don't say money is the issue or whatsoever is the issue. I can choose to just say, I want to get Jerry Soltech.site. So this is my lab, right? I want to play with this on my lab. You can see how much I can get this. This is 0.79. So this is very cheap compared to the one I searched earlier. And if you get this, it will still do the work for you. This is a routable domain. So you don't have to get the .com, right? You can get anything you want depending on your cost. So now once you create the account, you can pay, then have this in your dashboard. So I'm going to pull another browser where I have my domain. Let me refresh this and hope it's not. I'm bringing the screen up. I just want to log in. So for me, I use A2 hosting, right? And I have about 19 domains that I manage, right? So this is where I get my domain. So they are all there. So I can choose to just go to login. And when I log into the cPanel, at the cPanel, you can see that we have different stuffs here. So for yours, if you just click manage, it might just take you directly there because it's just one domain you have. So for me, I do host websites and other stuffs, right? So that's why I have a lot. So you don't have to have that much. But if I come to Zone Editor, so Zone Editor is where we can actually edit the records for the DNS records that we need to edit now for the domain we want to add to M365. So if I click on Zone Editor, I want to add this domain, right? So I'll click on Manage. So when I click on Manage now, I have the opportunity to add the DNS record now. So I will pause here. Let's go to M365. Let's see what Microsoft would provide for us. So when we are trying to add this now, I will be explaining what we are adding. So if I type the name of the site now, the domain, sorry, this is the one I want to add. So I'll be sure this is correct, abcofcloud.cloud. So you see, it doesn't have to be .com. So I'll click on use this domain. So when I click on use this domain, now think about it. You can't just wake up, create a Microsoft account and say, I want to add Microsoft.com to my tenant, or I want to add Facebook.com to my tenant. You can't, because that will be, it will cause a lot of problem, right? Because you'll be creating users for people with at Microsoft.com and all of that. So now when you want to add a domain, how do we solve the issue of people just adding random domains? We need to provide a text record. So you might come to, you might probably have an interview question or somebody is asking you, which record do you use to verify ownership of a domain? What you should say is the text record. So we use one of the function of the text record in terms of DNS records is used to verify that you're the owner of the domain. So what Microsoft is going to tell me now is, okay, we want to verify you own this domain. And you can see the options, right? One of the options is add a text record to the domain's DNS record. So now I would say yes, continue. So Microsoft will tell me, okay, this is the text record that you need to go and add to your, in your domain registrar, go there and add this to your DNS record. So if I go there now, I will copy this, I will copy this, and I'll copy this. So this is the longest one, so I'm copying this. So if you look at this now, this is the text name. This is at some domain registrar, they don't accept art. So you can see Microsoft already said it there. You can skip it. It doesn't have to be art. Then if you look at this, we have the value for the text record, and then we have the time to leave. So this is the time to leave for this text record. Now, this doesn't have to be this. Some domain providers, they use different value. You can choose to use theirs and it will still go very well. So once I select this, right, because I know this is what I really need to copy, this and this I don't need to, I will go to my domain. Now I can click on, I clicked on zone editor. So if you see zone editor, you can use zone editor to add records to your domain. So for this domain, I have different records here, but what I need to add now is the text record. So I'll just click on text record. I could as well just click add record. And when I click on add record, I will come down here, text record. Now, once I come down here, this is where I'm supposed to put the art. But if I put the art here, it doesn't accept it. So I'll probably just type abcofcloud.com there. It will accept that. And this is the time to leave. I would type it there, but you can see this domain registrar, they accept 14400. So I will leave it there. This is the, if you divide, is in seconds, right? So it's just like calculating the time your DNS record will hold a particular information. So if we come here, this is the text for verification, and now this is the value. So I'll paste the value and then save. So I don't want to save here because I already added this domain to this tenant, but as I had a conversation that, okay, we need to tell people how to add this, I removed it because I don't have any available tenants, right? And I don't have any free domain that is not added somewhere. So that's why I had to remove this. So let me go back. I will just cancel this and then let me look for the text record that I added earlier. So fast way to look for it, I can just click on text record. So if I go through the text record, this is the text record I added. So what I can do, I can edit it. This is the new value that I got. So it's still the same thing as putting the name, putting the time to leave. It doesn't have to be 3600, but you can choose to put that. Then I'll just click on save. So when I click on save now, most times this will actually take some time. So if you're doing the right thing, don't feel that something is wrong when you go back to confirm if your domain has been verified. Sometimes it can take up to 24 hours. So you just have to be patient. Sometimes in less than 2-3 minutes, this should be done. So if I come here, I will just click on verify. So it's already telling me, oh, you can see it requires up to 40. So yeah, this usually takes 10 minutes, although some DNS hosting providers requires up to 48 hours. So sometimes it can be up to within 10 minutes, this is done. And once it is done, so you can see what is actually telling me that I can see some records there already. These are the records that I'm seeing there, which is the old record that was there. I already removed this. And this is another record for another text record that we will be adding. So you can also use the text record for protection also. That's one of the function of the text record in terms of your mail protection. You can use the text record so that it will tell the mail server that is receiving your email that the person that is actually sending this person is actually authorized to send the email. So we can also use the text record for security purpose. So what I'm going to do now, I will just click on try again. Let's see what is going to happen. Okay, so this will probably take some time. So while this is taking some time, right? So I don't, I want to see if I would, once this works, I will just explain the MX record, or let me just explain the MX record and then the CNAME. So we have MX record because once we leave this place, the next values that Microsoft will be providing for us, right? The next records that we'll be getting from Microsoft is the MX record. So what the MX record does, right, is telling us the mail server that will be responsible for emails that we will send to that domain. So if we are to send emails, right, the MX record is responsible for routing that email to the server that is going to manage our email. So why I'm saying that is, if I get this, my domain now, I can actually be sending email from this provider. If I go to the cPanel now for this provider, you'll see I have email accounts. I can create email accounts here. So if I click on email accounts here, I can create my email account. So if I'm creating my email account, what will stop my email account from coming to this domain registrar instead of Microsoft is the MX record. So if I put in my MX record, the MX record will tell the mail, this is where you should be routing to. You're going to this particular tenant. And when you're doing that, there's what they call priority also. What priority does is, I could have different email record in this domain. I could have MX record, different MX record. So I have just one. So I could have different MX record. But when the emails are routing, which server should we pick? That's where the priority comes in. So if I have different email MX records here, and someone is sending an email, the way the mail will know the right server to go to is through the priority. So how does the priority work? The lower the priority number, then the higher the priority, or how will I put it? The lower the priority number, that is exactly where the email will be going through to. So if I have another MX record here and the priority is 2, 1, 3, I won't be getting mails on that particular domain, right? Or sorry, on that particular mail server, right? So what will happen is, when the mail is sent, the one with the least priority number would decide where the mail server that the mail should be routed to. So that's why this is on 0, which I would still edit. Or I think I might not even need to edit this. So this is going to be on 0. I'm just telling the internet, once anybody is sending any email to this domain, please, the mail server that should be handling it should be M365. So M365 will be the mail server that will be handling mails that will be sent to this domain. So the next one we'll be talking of is the CNAME. So what does CNAME do? The job of CNAME, right? When we are talking of records, CNAMEs, they are like alias. So what's alias now? Alias simply means I could have 2 names being directed to one name, right? Let's use this. Look at, I want to come here and type, let's go down here. Let me come here. Let me type contoso.com. If I type contoso.com, I'm going to Microsoft. And if I come here and I type Fabricam, I hope I'm spelling that right. Fabricam. So now, if at all I come here and I type Microsoft.com, I can still type www.microsoft.com. It's still taking me there. So you know what the CNAME is actually doing, right? CNAME is telling me that, it's telling the DNS, right? If anybody is adding www to this particular domain, take the person to Microsoft.com. And if I go back there, let me go back to this browser. Let me just go to CNAME. So you will see that I already created a CNAME, right, for www here, right? And I probably still created a CNAME for the auto discover. So what CNAME is doing in M365, right? It is just basically making you, when you're using your Outlook, you can easily connect to your Exchange from Outlook client. The auto discover there for M365, right? When you're using Outlook client, your CNAME is responsible for the auto discovery of your Outlook client. I think that's the best way I can put it, or somebody else can give a better way, right? But the CNAME is just what is making you, anytime you're using your account to sign into Outlook clients, you can easily receive your email on Outlook clients. And before, we probably have office365.com, outlook.com, and all of that. You can actually use CNAME to redirect your mails that, okay, if I'm going to this particular website with this typing, if I type this and I'm going to this particular website, redirect me to that particular website. CNAME is just like an alias that points a domain to another domain, or points a name to another name. That's what the CNAME does. So we would also be adding the CNAME to our M365. So let me just check if that is done now. 10 minutes sometimes can be 48 hours. Okay, so this is actually taking time. So that's why I was saying we'll probably do the other ones tomorrow. So, and why is probably taking time? I think, yeah.
Solomon, yeah. So can you go back to the expected record is different from the actual record. Can you copy the expected record in the TXT
This
value?
one,
Yes, they are
yeah,
different. That's why it's not
they're
saying it.
different.
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't notice that.
they're different.
Wait, let me go there. Where did I get the one I used? Is it? I know why they are different, right? Is I
Yeah,
removed it, so I changed it. So it's just time it would actually pick. This is the same thing, right? Let me just paste it
yeah,
beside. So it's just I know this my domain registrar, they are very good at delaying. If it's Namecheap, right? For some reason, when I'm setting up Namecheap, in less than 3 minutes, it will pick the whole stuff. So, but I know it's going to pick it. It's just that it's going to take time. That's why I actually said we might just have to continue next week. So what I would just advise, right? If you're adding your domain, the next step you should go through, let me see if I have, just hold on. Let me open another account and just show you what it will look like. I just want to see if I can, just give me a minute. I just want to log into an account and see something.
So for some other domains, Solomon, you can also let them know for some other domains, can automatically create it. We just create all the
Yeah, yeah.
records. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, you can actually do that automatically. I'm just trying to see if I can. I think this is also not. Okay. I I think I just have like the best option I can bring up now. Yeah, let me just log in here while I'm still clicking on try. So let me go to show. Okay, so yes, this is another. So let me use this. So if you look at this now, so once I verify and I click on next, this is, let me just see if it will. So yes, if I click on next, right, this is where I should be. So once I come here, this is what it will give me, this MX record, the CNAME, and the text record. So all I just need to do is copy it, right? The same way I did, I'll copy the name. So if I copy this for the MX record now, I'll copy this value, right? And you can see the priority is 0 if you want your mail to flow through this mail server. So once I copy that, I will come to the zone record and I will create the text record just as I did here. That's the MX record, sorry. So if I click on add, I will change this to MX, and then I will put the priority to 0, and then I'll paste this. Oh, wrong. So I will I'll copy this, and it should be the same, but let me just show you. So, okay, no, sorry, different name. So you see, I'll paste this, right? And once I paste this, I can now just use the name of the domain because of my domain registrar. Then if I click save, I'm done for that. Then the next thing I would do is come to this one. You can see this one, the host name is auto-discover, not at. So I'll copy the auto-discover, copy the auto-discover.outlook, and then come here. So when I come to the CNAME, you can see the CNAME also. This should be the CNAME. So this is the CNAME here that I have. So I'll paste the auto discover here, but now I'm adding my domain name because it doesn't accept any other value. Your domain name must be added for this registrar. So I'm also adding the value from M365, then I'll save it. So once I do that, I will come here also and copy the text record again. But now this is the feature of the function of this is for protection, no more for verification. So you can see that this can act, the text record can act as a means of protection and also a means of identification. So I will copy this, then go to this portal, the domain registrar cPanel, and paste it in the text record. So if you look at this text record, I probably have the second one there. So once I paste this here, all I just need to do is click on continue. And once I click on continue, I should be all good and I will get domain is set up completely. So if you're probably doing yours, you will probably come to a situation where you're waiting like me, right? So, but with over the years, I've noticed that name, okay, this has gone. So I know that name trip is fast. So this finally answered me. So I'll click on continue. So once I click on continue, it's just taking me to the same. So you can see what it's showing me. So these records are already there. So if I click on continue now, it should accept it. Yeah, so I've successfully added the domain to this. So now you can see this is my default domain. So once you add domain, you can add, I'm trying to remember how many domains, up to 1,000. Who knows the value of domains that can be added to M365? Who can still, does anybody have the exact figure? So you can add a lot of domains here. And when you are adding them, what you can do is you can always make them default. So I can choose to set this as my default domain. Why I'm telling you this is you might have different custom domain and you notice that anytime you're creating an account, you're mostly using just one of the domain to create the account. Maybe the rest are probably for alias or maybe sub-organizations, right? What you can actually do, you can click here and just make the domain default, right? You can set the domain as a default domain. So once you're done with this, anytime you're creating your users, if I click on add a new user, I can now use this domain. You can see it's because it is the default, it's automatically here. So if I just exit this and come to domains and I make this default, right? So once I make this default, if I try to create a new user right here, this is what will be the default domain that the user will have, but I can always change it. So I don't know why this is, wait, let me just, I should be able to change it. I don't know why it is stopped, but I can always change it. Even after naming a user, I can always come and change the username to another domain. So I can always come back and change the username to another domain. So once I save this user now, you can see that he's now on the new domain. So why I'm showing you this is because we'll be using this domain for the Active Directory and we'll be syncing users from the Active Directory to this particular tenant. So also before we do that, I will still try to explain the AD sync engine for you. So I don't want to do that now because I'm just giving you heads up on what we'll do next. So I will try to tell you the service accounts that are being created when we install the AD Connect, because there are some accounts that are created automatically, or you can choose to edit some of them to what you want. And apart from those accounts, I will try to explain the sync engine database, what is actually happening. Then I will also tell you how you can force sync. So I think that's basically what I should be talking about in the next training. But for now, you can just set up your domain and then wait till we have the next training next week. So thank you so much and sorry for your time. I know we've taken your time today. Yeah. So I wanted to ask, is there any questions from what MJ has told us, or probably about the DNS I spoke about? Is there anything you have any question you have, or you think we should talk about it in the next session? Is all fine. So you can just let us know now.
Please, the floor is open for questions. If you have any questions, any clarification, you can go ahead to ask a question.
Good evening.
Good evening, Joseph.
Thank you for the class. Please, I want to ask, as regard the domain that you went to create a custom domain, you went before you can get a domain name to create your domain. The place you went to, the website you went to, that is called Nameship.
Yeah.
Nameship. Is it a place where we can pick a domain name for ourselves, or purchase, or are there free domain names that we can always select from that end to create domain name for ourselves on our channels?
So for the other question, right, there was what I always used to train people before, which is Freenom. But for some reason, I think they are trying to, because of security, they've stopped giving free domains in Freenom. So if you tried it probably recently, for people that know it, you can't easily get free domain. So okay, somebody just posted the site freenom.com. You could get free domains there and you will use it. But unfortunately, we can't get free domains now. I don't know. Maybe there's another way, right? But I don't know how people can get free domain. The last time I was trying to get free domain for people, I just had to tell them, okay, go to Namecheap, create your account, and when you create your account, search for the cheapest. So that's how I found out that we have cheaper ones in Namecheap in terms of the sites. So instead of .com, I told them, depending on your pocket, if you can get .com, it's fine. But if you can get .site, right? Even if the country is hard, right? There's some little sacrifice I just think people can make. So the sacrifice is that this should not be up to 1,000 naira, right, in Nigeria. So if you can just find a way to sacrifice and get this, it will do the job for you. You'll be able to add it to your on-prem, add it to your M365. So I tested this before even telling them, because I wanted them to say, okay, they say, you told me to get this. So I went for the cheapest, and I was trying to be sure if they will allow me to add DNS records and all of that. So I tested it, and they allowed everything you want to do, you can do it here. So you can always come here, get this, set it up, and you would use it. So for payment gateway, most people that needed help in terms of, probably, I think we have some .ng, right? It might be expensive for them, right? I don't know how much is .ng, but for those that didn't want to pay for the .ng, right, what I just did for them, they created an account, sent me the password, I logged in, and I paid with my international card, because I know now Naira MasterCard is a problem. So I think I paid for over 10 people by logging into their distance. So just so that nobody's giving an excuse that, oh, it's because I could not pay for domain. I could not test how domain work in M365. So yeah. So just know that for the domain, you might not get a free one, but then you should not spend more
Your
than
monthly, or
1,000.
how do they?
It's not monthly, this is
Implement?
yearly. It's not monthly, it is
Okay,
yearly.
thank
Yeah,
you.
look at it. This is per year. So it's yearly you're paying for it. So they give discounts on some of them. So you can check. So what I just do, I just type random this top level domain name. So I'll just come here and also check .co and see what is going to happen. So I can see .co. You see, this is expensive for some people. So I would still come down here and go through, because sometimes they do discount. So you can see that the one I picked is still the cheapest. That's to tell you that I've actually been looking around to see how people can get the cheapest and do this. So if I go to this site, so you can see it is the cheapest. So you can just jump on this now. Anybody that wants to get a cheap domain, you can just, it doesn't have to be Jesotech, please. You can use your own name and add Jesotech. If it is taken, they'll tell you. So just look for something. Yeah, so I think yeah.
Yeah, just in addition to the question, so for people that have access to these virtual studio or enterprise subscription for an Azure, usually the Microsoft certified trainer, the subscription allows you to purchase an app service domain, only that the domain registrar will be Azure. That means your domain is hosted on Azure, and all the records, every record that Solomon is showing us, the CNAME, you can also add them there. You can do the same thing basically, but only that the DNS provider will be on Azure. So that's another way you can get a free domain. I have over 10 of them because I had the subscriptions for since 2020, and I was purchasing every year different domains. So you can also, if you have opportunity for that particular subscriptions, you can purchase a domain for free too with that subscription.
Okay, thank you.
Emmanuel, please, before you go, you have to be an MCT to get that, right? Or you just need to
Yes.
have it?
So to
Okay.
be an
Okay.
once you're an MCT, what you used to become an MCT is an Azure exam. Maybe is it 500, is it 100?
Okay.
That is a subscription that will be attached to your MCT. But if you use MS 700 or Microsoft any of the MX series to become an MCT, it's going to be a different subscription. It's an NPM partner subscription which you cannot actually use. But for those that became MCT with Azure, they gave them the virtual studio enterprise subscription.
Okay. So I just wanted everybody to be sure also, so that you don't start turning around with your developer's account. Okay. Yeah. So I think we don't have any questions again. See you guys tomorrow on Saturday. I will just try my best to see how to simplify the the Azure AD Connect, because once you understand it, you'll be able to troubleshoot it. Most times people, they come across different issues, right? So you can easily know what you're going to be doing, what you're troubleshooting, and all of that. Yeah. So thank you so much for your time, and over to you, Joshua or Emmanuel. I don't know if maybe you